Eric Blake says, greetings, Bill Whittle, Vectron of the Aurora Star Republic. Here's a movie question I know for a fact you will love. 2 years ago, I learned of some movie news that really reminded me of your classic George Washington Virgin Airlines pitch. As you would always sum up, because George Washington was a swinging deadly dude and that's why we love him. Yes, I practically know the darn thing by heart. As such, I've been long meaning to bring this up for the lounge, but like a dunce, I keep forgetting. So here goes. 2 years ago, Zack Snyder, director of 300, and in my admittedly not so humble opinion, the greatest on-screen treatment of Superman ever, Man of Steel, noted that he would love to do an American Revolution flick in the spirit of 300. As he put it, the classic painting of the Delaware Crossing is so awesomely stylish in a way that invokes 300. And with that, one thought filled my mind, and I quote, because George Washington was a swinging deadly dude and that's why we love him. Seems like Zack Snyder loves him too. Thoughts? P.S. I'd love for you to recite that pitch tonight. Personally, I'd have the four gorgeous women in question be your friend Kelly Carlson, Gail Godot, a.k.a. Wonder Woman, Margot Robbie, and the angelic Amy Adams. I don't really quite get that last part, but in any event, yes, I would be saying to young people that at Tea Party events and things like this is a subject I still bring up. I say, I understand why we have parchments and quills, and we have pictures of the Constitution, and we have pictures of Jefferson and Washington and Benjamin Franklin. I understand all of this, muskets and Gadsden flags, and I love it because I understand what these people did. But if you've never been taught these things, and most people, young people, not only haven't been taught them, they've been excluded from learning about them. You are asking young people to get behind a political philosophy of 250 years in the past. And we cannot do that. We have to make conservative something in the future, which is why I'm doing the work I'm doing after hours. But put that aside for a second. Basically what I said was, if George Washington were standing here, if you could picture George Washington with me on stage right now, I know what you'd think. You'd think he'd be there in his, his knee breeches and his, ruffled shirt and his vest and his, his frock coat and his, I never saw a tri-corner hat and a musket and all the rest of it, but that's not what George Washington was like. He was the best dressed man of his time. He was probably the best dressed man in the world. He sent a note to London during the war, I think, and requested 4 very, very nice vests because he wanted to look like the president of a civilized society. So he was the best dressed man in the world. So if he were here today, George Washington wouldn't be wearing all these things. He'd be wearing a $2,000 Armani suit. He'd have an $800 haircut. He'd be wearing $1,000 shoes, and he'd be carrying an AR-15 with a red dot scope on it because he was a swinging deadly dude. That's what he was to the people who knew him. One of the things that I've always felt, and I can't remember the name of it, there were these cartoonists that were very popular during the Iraq War. I want to say right around 2003, 4, 5, 6, and I've forgotten their name. I have both of their books. They're great guys. But they did something that I've always thought was important, and that was every time they drew Uncle Sam, they didn't draw him as an old man. They drew him as a very, very strong young guy, like just this really strong, healthy young guy. And I like that. I've heard other people say they would like to do that. Washington was an absolutely amazing guy. And if you were to do Washington accurately, I think you would miss the Washington. Now, I'm not one of these people that believes in, fake but accurate. I mean, truth is truth and fiction is fiction. But just as one small point of fact, when Washington was sworn in the first time, or certainly the second time, he probably had one natural tooth left. He might have had 2 or 3, but I think he only had 1. His teeth were completely gone. Cox and Forkham, that's it. Thank you very much, George. And blast hard cheese. So he had 1 tooth, and his teeth were not made out of, what did the people said it was made out of wood? It wasn't made out of wood. He had false teeth made out of human teeth, animal teeth, and ivory and stuff, but they were exceedingly uncomfortable. If you just want to Google George Washington dentures and you think about the fact that this man had to have these things in his mouth, his teeth bothered him from the time he was very young, as mine had, until I went and got them fixed. And my haven't had any problems with them ever since they started making them out of steel and porcelain. Mark Twain said that too. Mark Twain said that your teeth are useless. The only time you ever have good teeth is when you can find somebody to construct them for you. I know there are people out there with excellent teeth, but George Washington was not one of them. So if you were going to do this story accurately, you'd have to have a guy who's just the presence of a mouth that was filled with either brown and missing teeth or ridiculous-looking, by modern standards, dentures. Just that alone would so prejudice you against him that it would be it'd be a disservice to him. We look at his teeth, for example, and we'd just be horrified if he showed his actual teeth. Same thing with Elizabeth, by the way. Elizabeth I had essentially no teeth left, and was pretty much completely bald, and her breath just reeked and everything. And we think, my God, how can a queen look like that? Well, a queen can look like that because that's the limit of dentistry. The same for George Washington. He had the best teeth he could afford. But if you're going to do them 100% accurately, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. You would be up against that kind of bias and prejudice, the prejudice that we have whenever we judge people from the past for not living up to our lofty standards. So if you're going to capture the essence of Washington, you have to go for creating a Washington as Washington appeared to his peers. And a great example of what I'm talking about is one of my favorite entertainment stories ever. Because the second I heard this explanation, I just thought, that's just absolutely brilliant. I completely get it. My favorite piece of entertainment ever is Deadwood. 3 episodes of that show. It's my favorite thing I've ever seen. I loved it. With the possible exception of Les Mis on Broadway. But I loved that show. I loved it. And Deadwood was on HBO, I want to say around 2003, 4, somewhere in there. And it had a reputation, well-deserved I might add, for being the most profane show on television. That the language in that show was just unbelievably, unremittingly profane in every regard. And they asked the show creator, whose name escapes me now, Michael something, it'll show up in 28 seconds or something. They said, surely the people of Deadwood didn't use these words like, some of the compound adjectives that we have and all of these F words and all of these other words and C words and all the rest of it. They certainly didn't use those words, right? And he said, no, they did not use those words. They used words like damn and bastard and go to hell. But damn and bastard and go to hell was the strongest language they had. And if we were to use that actual language now, we'd be historically accurate, but we'd be emotionally false. The reason we're using these words is because people used in that mining town, they used words as a defense against attack. They basically spoke in such a way that was so shockingly profane that people didn't want to mess with them. And that's why we use the F word and all these other words. And I thought that is absolutely brilliant. That's exactly brilliant. That's it. He's recreating the emotional truth at the expense of the historical accuracy. He's trying to shock modern audiences with language that's unbelievably aggressive, because the language that those people used was incredibly aggressive. But if it turned out that you said, oh, hell, and that was supposed to empty the room, it just wouldn't work. And that's what I would have to do, I think, if you're going to do Washington. You'd have to try and create modern, what's the word? I'm not analogies exactly. Modern extensions, I guess, of the things that happened to him. So he'd have to be handsomer than he was, because he was, by the standards of the time, an incredibly handsome guy. I don't remember what Washington's actual height is. Somebody will tell me again in a second. It might have been 6'4", something like that. If you're going to do it in a movie, you need to make him today, you need to make him 6'8", right? Because 6'4" in 1776 was unbelievably tall. He's just shockingly tall. You need to add a couple of inches to that, for at least that, in order to give the impression of just how big this guy was. And he'd have to be really handsome and well-dressed. But the idea of doing it in the style of 300 is a great idea. And it reminds me of somebody who was kind enough to Photoshop my face on it. I'm sure you've seen these pictures of various presidents, historical presidents, as paintings, and one of them is Ronald Reagan. He's riding a velociraptor. He's got an American flag in one hand. He's got an Uzi or something in the other, and he's just gunning down people. And they're all made to look like badasses. And that's kind of what he was. So, yeah, I think that's how I would do it. And I hope Snyder has the means to do it.